She arrived at the outpost for one simple reason: to see her husband. Nothing more. No rank stitched to her jacket, no symbols of authority, just a woman wrapped in a wool scarf that still carried the sharp scent of winter. Standing alone in a frozen place meant for soldiers. The snow was thick, untouched, the kind that muted sound and gave the illusion of peace. Then the silence shattered. The blast ripped through the air without warning. Alarms howled. Gunfire tore across the base, snapping over rooftops and cutting through drifting snow. Soldiers dove for cover as chaos replaced calm. No one knew where the shots were coming from until a single, deliberate crack echoed from the mountains. Then another, precise, controlled. Suddenly, it was clear someone unseen was fighting back. Just after sunrise, a transport dropped Catherine Hayes at Gate 3. Cold air burned her lungs as she stepped out, breath fogging white. She wore plain civilian clothes, jeans, a thermal jacket, boots crusted with salt from the long drive. The scarf at her neck was handmade, uneven, familiar, a small piece of another life. Forward operating base, Granite sat low in a valley, squeezed between two prefab buildings were half buried under snowdrifts. 27 soldiers lived here, tasked with quiet border surveillance. Long shifts, broken equipment, nothing heroic, just endurance. She signed the visitor log with stiff fingers. The corporal on duty barely glanced at her papers. Young, exhausted. Captain Hayes is in the command trailer, he said, voice flat. Third building past the fuel depot. Catherine nodded. She already knew. She'd memorized the layout days earlier, studying satellite images out of habit. A habit her husband didn't know she still had. The snow crunched beneath her boots as she walked. Morning light painted everything pale blue. 2 soldiers passed carrying ammunition crates, laughing about something trivial. The sound felt fragile. She found David inside the command trailer, bent over a radio, adjusting dials with practiced focus. He didn't notice her at first. She watched him, how precise his movements were, how his jaw tightened when static interfered. That thing still acting up? She asked. He turned, surprise giving way to a smile. Cat, I thought you weren't coming until next week. Got the dates wrong, she said easily. A lie. She'd come early, after tracking weather shifts and regional activity. Something had felt wrong. He pulled her into a quick embrace. Coffee and cold metal clung to him. How long can you stay? 2 days, maybe 3. He studied her face. You look tired. 6-hour drive. She loosened her scarf, draping it over a chair. You look worse. He laughed, but didn't argue. Deep lines framed his eyes. Too many years in hard places. Equipment's a mess, he said. Sensors are failing. Snow's getting into everything. Satellite drops during shift changes. She moved closer to the console, eyes scanning automatically. Temperature fluctuation, frequency drift. I've been compensating manually. She nodded, noticing details he'd grown used to, ignoring the low backup battery, cracked antenna insulation, an emergency frequency card barely hanging to the wall. This base is duct tape and prayers, he muttered. Where's your secondary radio supply? Cannibalized. No backup. Then, she stored that away. They stepped back outside. The wind had shifted. Catherine stopped, turning toward the northern ridge. Temperature dropped fast. Forecast says clear, David replied. She studied the sky. To still, the kind of quiet that came before impact. The visitor quarters were exactly as promised, bare functional. She set her bag down and unzipped it. Clothes on top. Toiletries. A paperback she wouldn't open. Beneath a false bottom sewn years ago lay tools from another life. She left them untouched. For now, outside, the base stirred. Generators hummed. Diesel fumes drifted. Catherine walked slowly along the perimeter, playing the role of a bored spouse. But her eyes worked constantly. Defensive gaps. Poor sight. Snow piling into blind spots. One sensor housing was cracked open. Circuitry icing over. 2 guards at the gate chatted over coffee, barely watching the road. A fuel depot sat unguarded behind chain-link fencing. And above it, all the North Ridge. High ground. Complete visibility. Perfect control. The assessment came automatically. Cold and precise. 8 years away hadn't erased it. She found David near the mess hall, speaking with a stocky sergeant named Williams. Security, infantry, she guessed. Motion sensors again, Williams said. Either glitches or wildlife. Probably wildlife, David replied. Catherine looked past them, back to the ridge. Snow began to blow sideways now. Her fingers numbed inside her gloves. Comes back up, she asked quietly. Radios and a relay station 12 miles out. Too far. The first explosion hit at 1340. The mess hall shook violently. Trays flew. Lights flickered out. For one frozen second, no one moved. Then alarms screamed out. David was already running. Contact north. Outside, smoke rose from the fence line. Metal, twisted. Soldiers lay still in the snow. Gunfire cracked from above, disciplined and relentless. They're on the ridge, someone shouted. Dot. David tried the radio. Static. Every channel dead. They've cut us off, he said, eyes locking on Catherine's. He ordered a fallback. She didn't move. She was watching patterns, angles, timing, coordination. This wasn't random. It was methodical. The base was being dismantled piece by piece. And Catherine Hayes understood exactly how and why. Asterisk. The attackers pressed their advantage immediately. Fire poured down from the ridge in layered waves high, mid-lowish element feeding the others. The north side of the base became a funnel of death, a space where movement invited punishment. Snow and smoke blurred everything, turning distance into deception. Soldiers fired back at flashes and echoes, burning ammunition against enemies they couldn't see. An explosion tore through the motor pool. One of the Humvees ignited in a violent bloom of flame, black smoke clawing upward into the pale sky. The blast wave knocked men off their feet. Someone screamed. Another voice shouted orders that were swallowed by gunfire. David dragged a wounded soldier behind a concrete barrier. Blood streaked across the snow in a dark, unnatural line. The man's leg was mangled, barely attached below the knee. A medic crawled toward them, bullets snapping overhead. Fall back. Regroup. At Martinez started to yell. Automatic fire cut him off. He hit the ground hard, helmet scraping concrete. Secondary line, David shouted. Positions 3 through 7 move. The withdrawal was disciplined but desperate. Soldiers covered each other, hauling the wounded, retreating step by step. Mortar fire followed them in, one round slamming into the mess hall. The roof collapsed inward with a grinding roar. Catherine moved with the group, counting without meaning to. 23 present. For missing or down. The secondary line offered better coordinate forced positions closer to the center of the base, but it was still blind to the ridge. The high ground controlled everything. David crouched beside her, breathing hard. Blood ran from a cut on his forehead. He didn't seem to notice. They're maneuvering, he said. Trying to flank us. They already are, Catherine replied. East side next. They'll pin you here and swing around the fuel depot. He stared at her. How do you know that? Before she could answer, a new sound cut through the chaos. A thin, mechanical buzz. Drones. 3 quadcopters emerged from the smoke, hovering above the compound. Cameras pointed downward. One dropped a canister. Red smoke billowed outward, thick and disorienting. Recon and targeting, Williams shouted. He fired at one drone and missed. It darted away, repositioning. The situation was unraveling fast. Visibility dropped to almost nothing. Snow and smoke merged into a white wall. Soldiers fired at shadows. Control slipped. Ammunition burned away. Cease fire, David yelled. Controlled shots only, but fear was contagious. Discipline fractured. A squad moving to reinforce the east side walked straight into an ambush. 2 men went down instantly. The rest scattered. Pinned. Catherine pressed against a wall, her mind separating signal from noise. The attackers were skilled, trained. This wasn't militia chaos. This was a planned assault, timed to weather and shift change. Communications targeted first. Pressure applied with intent. Professionals had patterns. She listened past the noise, isolating rhythm. The anchor was the high-position heavy weapon. Controlled bursts. 7 to 9 rounds. Pause. Reload or barrel change. 12 seconds. A window. A young soldier stumbled past her. Face drained of color. Hands shaking so badly, he couldn't hold his rifle. Hey, she said sharply, grabbing his arm. Look at me. What's your name? Peterson. Okay, Peterson. Breathe in through your nose. Count to 4. Out through your mouth. He tried, failed. Tried again. That's it, she said. Stay here. Keep your head down. She moved on, found Williams behind an overturned container. He was fighting his radio. Frustration etched into his face. Relay's gone, he said. Either jammed or destroyed. Destroyed, Catherine said. Before the main assault, Williams looked at her hard. You sound real sure. I am. Before he could ask more, David appeared. We need to collapse inward. Pull everyone back to the core. That's what they want, Catherine said immediately. They're hurting you. Mortar will finish it. Both men stared at her now. How do you know this? David asked. She met his eyes. Because I can see their overwatch position even if I can't physically see them. Third, ridge. Northeast face, single shooter coordinating fire. Williams exhaled slowly. You can hear that. I can read it. Silence stretched between them, filled only by distant gunfire. David's voice dropped. Kat, what did you do before we met? She didn't answer. She pointed instead. Your spare rifle. Where is it? The armory. But it's stripped. What caliber? 7.62. I need it. And whatever optics you have. David grabbed her arm. This is insane. What are you planning? To give you a chance. The armory was a converted container. Cold and dim. Racks of rifles lined the walls. Catherine found the M110 quickly. It was incomplete, but serviceable. She checked the action. Clean break. Good trigger. I need your scope, she said. The one in your desk. David froze. He hadn't told her about it, had never brought it out. How do you now? He returned minutes later with a hard case. Inside was a fixed power look. Not perfect, but usable. Williams stepped in, stopping short when he saw the rifle in her hands. Ma'am, what are you doing? Buying time. You can't go out there. I'm not going there. She pointed south, toward a lower ridge. I'm going there. That's exposed. 400 yards. Alone. I'll have elevation and rock cover. David stepped between them. You're not trained for this. She looked at him steadily. I was trained for exactly this. The truth landed hard. I was a Marine Scout sniper, she said. 8 years, 2 deployments. David's face went blank. Williams stared. Scout sniper, 1st Battalion, 8th Marines. Williams let out a low whistle. Valute. She nodded once. The base shook again as another explosion landed nearby. Time was gone. Williams turned to David. Sir, if she's real, we need her. David closed his eyes, then nodded. What do you need? A diversion. Make it loud. Draw their eyes north. I'll handle it, Williams said, already moving. David handed her a rangefinder, a compact spotting scope, a wind meter. Can you make the shot? He asked quietly. I've made harder. He pulled her close, holding on longer than necessary. Don't die. I won't. She stepped back into the white chaos and disappeared toward the south ridge. The run to the south ridge took minutes that felt stretched thin and fragile. Catherine moved low, timing her movement between bursts of incoming fire, letting the smoke and snowfall swallow her outline. The rifle rode heavy against her back. Her breath burned her lungs as she reached the base of the ridge and began the climb. The rock face was slick with ice. Her gloves scraped against stone. Fingers searching for holds that memory and instinct seemed to find before conscious thought. 50 feet. 75. Her muscles complained, but they obeyed. When she reached the narrow shelf halfway up, she flattened herself against the rock and forced her breathing to slow. The world narrowed. As she cleared snow away with her forearm, and set up fast spotting scope first. Through magnification, shapes emerged from the blur. Movement behind a fallen tree, a rifle team shifting positions, and higher there, a flicker of brass, a shadow behind a mounted weapon. She ranged it. 630 yards. Wind cut across the valley from the northwest, gusting hard. Temperature low, pressure falling. The calculations assembled instantly, numbers sliding into place without effort. Below, Williams' diversion began. Sustained fire erupted toward the north ridge. Loud, aggressive. Exactly what she'd asked for. The attackers reacted as predicted. Shifting attention upward, Catherine settled in behind the scope. The machine gunner came into view, white parka. Professional kit, body tucked tight behind cover. He fired again. 8 rounds pause. She controlled her breathing. In, out. The crosshair floated with her. Pulse. The gunner reached for the barrel. She pressed the trigger. The rifle cracked, sharp and clean. Recoil pushed into her shoulder, familiar and grounding. Through the scope, she saw the impact. The man snapped backward, slumping over the weapon. The gun fell silent. She worked the bolt without thought, chambering the next round. Confusion rippled through the ridge. The rifle teams below hesitated, unsure. They hadn't seen the shot, didn't know where it came from. She found the next target, mid-level shooter standing too tall, trying to identify what went wrong above him. A mistake. She adjusted and fired. He dropped instantly. Now they knew. Movement erupted across the ridge as the attackers scrambled for cover. Discipline began to fracture. Without overwatch, they were exposed. Below. David's voice cut through the chaos. Push now. The defenders surged forward, momentum shifting sharply. Catherine stayed focused. A spotter tried to relocate. She tracked him through the scope, waited for the moment his movement committed him, then fired. He fell forward into the snow and didn't rise. Incoming rounds snapped toward the south ridge. Wild, searching fire. They knew the direction now, not the position. Catherine shifted laterally along the shelf, changing angles, breaking pattern. She found the low position, a cluster of 4, behind rock cover. One was on a radio, frantic. That one mattered most. She centered the crosshair, adjusted for wind that had picked up again, and fired. The radio operator folded, collapsing over the device. The others scattered immediately, breaking formation, trying to survive rather than coordinate. One ran hard, fast. She led him, fired once. Miss Snow exploded ahead of him. She adjusted, fired again. He went down tumbling, momentum carrying him into the drift. Below, the base was alive with motion now. Williams led a squad up the eastern flank. Martinez pushed north. The defenders moved with purpose again. No longer trapped. The attackers were retreating. Catherine tracked another target heavy weapons specialist, attempting to set up a mortar tube. She put a round through the targeting site. Glass and metal shattered. The man abandoned the weapon and fled. That was it. The assault collapsed in on itself. Groups pulled back toward the far side of the ridge, retreating to waiting vehicles. Catherine let them go. The objective wasn't annihilation. It was control. She stayed on the shelf, watching, counting minutes. 5 passed. Then, silence. The smoke thinned. Snow drifted softly again. The valley settled. When she climbed down, her legs shook not from fear, but from the sudden absence of it. Adrenaline bled away, leaving weight behind. The base was secured. Fires were being put out. Medics moved between the wounded. The damage was severe, but survivable. She walked back through the gate, carrying the rifle openly. Soldiers stared. Word had spread. David stood near the wrecked command trailer. Relief crossed his face when he saw her. All targets down, he asked. The important ones, she said. The rest fled. Williams joined them, breathing hard. How many? 7 confirmed. Possibly more. He shook his head slowly. 7? In minutes. David redirected him. We stabilize and hold. They won't return today. They won't, Catherine agreed. Not after losing leadership and heavy weapons. Williams studied her with something like awe. Scout sniper, he said quietly. That explains a lot. She said nothing. Later, as medevac helicopters thundered down into the valley, Catherine stood apart, watching body bags loaded alongside the wounded. The cost wasn't light, but it could have been far worse. 8 years away hadn't erased who she was. It had only buried it. David found her at the aid station. He sat on a cot, arm bandaged. When she entered, he looked up. You okay? She asked. Scratches, he said. You? She didn't lie. No. She sat across from him, exhaustion finally catching her. I thought I'd left it behind, she said. But it's still there. David took her hand. What I saw today wasn't a killer. It was someone protecting people. She closed her eyes, feeling something ease open inside her chest. Outside, the helicopters lifted away. The base grew quiet against Card, but standing, and nothing between them would ever be the same. Night settled over the base slowly, the kind of cold, clear darkness that followed violence. Emergency generators hummed in uneven rhythm, casting long shadows across damaged structures. Snow no longer fell. The sky had opened, sharp and star-filled. Catherine stood near the south fence, looking up at the ridge. In daylight it had seemed smaller, almost ordinary. Now it loomed again, etched in memory by angles and trajectories. Only she could still see. The geometry hadn't faded. It probably never would. David approached with 2 cups of coffee, real coffee, rich and dark. Someone had brought it in on the medevac birds. Thought you might need this, he said. She took it, warming her hands. They stood together without speaking. Around them, soldiers reset positions, checking gear, re-establishing perimeter routines. The tension was different now. Tested, hardened. They left equipment behind. David said after a while, professional grade. This wasn't random. No, Catherine agreed. It was a probe, testing response times, defenses, communications. You think they'll come back? Eventually, not soon. He studied her, the weight of everything still heavy between them. You really were one of the best, weren't you? She hesitated, then nodded. I was effective. The truth didn't feel like pride. It felt like acceptance. Later, alone, she replayed the shots in her mind. Calculations, corrections, one acceptable ratio. That was what scared her. 3 days later, she drove away from Fob Granite. In the mirror, the base shrank until it vanished behind the hills. Official reports were already being written. Coordinated defense, multiple shooters. Her name would exist in files, not headlines. David had asked her to stay longer. She hadn't. They both needed space. The rifle lay wrapped in a blanket in her trunk. He'd insisted. Protection, he said. They both knew better. The road stretched south, empty and white. She drove alone, thoughts circling old paths. She hadn't stopped being a sniper. She'd only pretended not to be. Behind her, a bay survived because a woman came only to visit her husband. The snow kept falling. The world kept moving. The official debriefs began before the smoke fully cleared. Catherine sat through them quietly, answering questions with precision, giving timelines, distances, firing positions. Her voice stayed calm, professional. The language came back easily, too easily. Williams took notes without interrupting. Others listened with a mixture of respect and unease. They didn't ask about her past. Not directly. The file would do that for them later. By the time it was over, the base felt smaller, changed. Soldiers moved with purpose, but also with a new awareness. They'd seen how close the edge really was. David walked her to the perimeter before she left. The snow had been plowed just enough for vehicles to pass. Temporary repairs were underway. Engineers would come later. Reinforcements too. FOB granite would survive. I don't know what this means for us, he said quietly. I don't either, Catherine replied, but we'll figure it out. Or we won't. Either way, we'll be honest. He nodded. That was all either of them could promise. She hugged him once more, longer than before, then climbed into a car and drove away. Miles passed beneath her tires. Snow gave way to patches of exposed road, then back to white again. The rhythm of driving soothed her, but her mind stayed sharp, replaying moments she wished she could forget, and others she knew she never would. 7 confirmed. 1 miss. She hated that the numbers still mattered. She hated that part of her felt steady, satisfied, complete. The truth followed her down the road, unavoidable now. She could build another life. She could pretend again, but she would always carry the skills, the instincts, the cold clarity that surfaced. When things fell apart, some people were shaped by violence and spent the rest of their lives pretending they weren't. Others learned to live with it. The sun dipped low on the horizon as she drove on, alone with her thoughts, carrying both the woman she had tried to become and the sniper. She would never fully escape. The road stretched forward, and she kept driving. The sun finally disappeared behind the hills, leaving the road wrapped in dusk. Catherine drove with the headlights cutting twin tunnels through the gathering dark. The heater hummed softly. The world outside felt distant, muted, like something she was passing through, rather than belonging to. Her phone stayed silent. David hadn't called. She hadn't expected him to. Some conversations couldn't happen over a line. Some truths needed space before they could be faced. The rifle shifted slightly in the trunk. As the car hit a patch of uneven pavement, she felt it more than heard it. The weight of it followed her. A quiet reminder of what she carried and what she couldn't put down. She thought about the men on the ridge, the way they'd moved, the discipline in their fire. Professionals. Someone would come looking for answers, who they were, who sent them, what they wanted from a forgotten base in the middle of nowhere. That work would go on without her. It always did. What stayed with her was the ease, the way everything had snapped back into place when the shooting started. Fear hadn't led, doubt hadn't slowed her. There had been only clarity and action. That was the part she'd spent 8 years trying to bury. She remembered the first time she'd been told she had the temperament for the job. Calm under pressure, detached when it mattered. They'd said it like it was a gift. She'd believed them then. Later, she learned the cost. A red light appeared ahead. She slowed, stopped, waited alone at the intersection. Snow drifted across the empty crossroad. No other cars, no witnesses, just her and the quiet. When the light changed, she drove on. Somewhere behind her, reports were being finalized. Names logged, coordinates marked, lessons learned. Fob granite would become a footnote in incident that almost went very wrong, and didn't. Somewhere ahead, a different life waited. Or maybe the same one, reshaped by truth. She didn't know which yet. What she did know was this. She had stopped running from who she was. Whether she could live with that truth remained unanswered. The road stretched forward, into darkness, and Catherine Hayes kept driving, carrying the past with her, no longer hidden, no longer denied, just present, steady, and impossible to ignore. Morning found her, hours later. The sky slowly lightening as she crossed into lower ground. The snow thinned, retreating to the shoulders of the road, replaced by wet asphalt and bare earth. Civilization returned in small signs, power lines, distant farmhouses, a gas station glowing like a lone ship at sea. She pulled over once, just long enough to stretch and breathe. The air here was warmer, damp instead of biting. It felt wrong somehow, like stepping into a different world too quickly. She stood beside the car, hands in her pockets, watching her breath fade faster than it had days earlier. No gunfire, no alarms, just wind moving through empty space. She thought about the base waking up without her, soldiers repairing damage, recounting the fight in fragments, the story growing sharper with each retelling. Someone would point to the South Ridge and lower their voice. Someone else would say her name with quiet certainty. She hadn't asked for that. She got back in the car and kept driving. By midday, traffic thickened. Radios played news and advertisements, voices cheerful and disconnected from anything real. She turned it off. Silence suited her better now, gave her room to think, even if she didn't like where her thoughts went. David's face kept returning to her mind, not in the moment of shock, but later, when he'd understood, the way his expression had shifted from disbelief to something heavier, acceptance, maybe, or the beginning of it. Love didn't vanish because of truth, but it changed shape. She wondered if he was still angry, if he was replaying the same questions she was. 8 years was a long time to live beside someone and not know the full measure of them, long enough for silence to harden into something dangerous. She reached the outskirts of the city by late afternoon. Traffic lights, crosswalks, people moving with purpose that had nothing to do with survival. She stopped at a red light and watched a group of teenagers laughing on the corner, backpacks slung over their shoulders. None of them had any idea how close the world could come to breaking. The light changed. She drove on home, if it could still be called that, waited at the end of the road. A small house, neutral walls, the life she'd built deliberately, carefully, to be ordinary. She pulled into the driveway and sat there for a long moment with the engine off. The silence pressed in. Inside, nothing had changed. The same furniture, the same quiet, her shoes by the door where she'd left them days earlier. Evidence of a life uninterrupted by war, even if she knew better now. She set her keys down, took off her jacket, stood in the middle of the room, and felt the weight finally settle. She didn't cry. She didn't feel relief. Just a steady, unfamiliar honesty. The door to the spare room stood slightly open. Inside was a closet she rarely used. At the back, behind old coats and boxes, was a locked case she hadn't opened in years. She didn't touch it. Not yet. Some things, once acknowledged, didn't need to be proven again. She went to the window and looked out as the evening approached, the sky bruising with color. Somewhere far away, the North Ridge still existed. Somewhere else, 7 men didn't. And here, in this quiet house, Catherine Hayes stood between the person she had been and the one she was still becoming, knowing there was no longer any pretending they were different. That night passed without sleep, not because of fear, and not because of regret. Her body was simply done pretending it didn't remember. When she closed her eyes, she didn't see faces. She saw terrain, angles, wind, distances, measured and clean, unforgiving numbers. She let it happen. At dawn, she made coffee and drank it, standing at the kitchen counter, watching the light creep across the floor. The house felt neutral, again, not safe, not hostile, just a place that was new. For years, she'd built safety out of denial. Now there was only awareness. Her phone buzzed once. A message from David. "I'm still thinking. I will be for a while. But I love you." That hasn't changed. She read it twice. Didn't respond immediately. Some things didn't need speed. She set the phone down and breathed, slow and steady, like she'd taught Peterson. Outside, the world moved on. Cars passed. A neighbor walked a dog. Ordinary life, uninterrupted. By mid-morning, she opened the spare room closet, pulled the case free, set it on the bed. The lock clicked open under her fingers. Inside, everything was exactly as she'd left it. Clean, maintained, not nostalgic - prepared. She didn't assemble anything. She didn't need to. Just knowing it was there was enough. Acknowledgement, not intention. She closed the case again. Later, she sat at the small desk by the window and wrote not reports, not time, just thoughts. Fragments. Questions she'd avoided for years. Who she was when no one needed saving. Who she wanted to be when they did. There were no answers yet. As evening came, she stepped outside. The air was cool, but gentle. Nothing like the brutal cold of granite. She looked up at the sky, clear and open, and felt something unfamiliar settle in her chestnut piece. Exactly. Permission. She didn't have to choose today. She didn't have to erase anything. The past wasn't a chain if she stopped pretending it didn't exist. Some people carried their weapons openly, others carried them inside. Catherine Hayes had done both. And now, finally, she was done hiding from either. Morning came quietly this time, not with urgency, not with memory pressing in all at once, but with a slow, ordinary kind of light that filtered through the curtains and settled across the room. Catherine woke before the alarm she hadn't set. Her body still ran on old habits. Early, alert, ready. She lay there for a moment, listening. No generators, no distant rotor wash, just the muted sounds of a neighborhood starting its day. A car door closing, someone walking past on the sidewalk. Life unremarkable and intact. She got up, showered, dressed. Simple movements, familiar routines. In the mirror, she studied her reflection longer than usual. She didn't look different. That was the strange part. No visible marker for what had surfaced and refused to go back down. The phone rang while she was pouring coffee. David's name lit the screen. She answered without hesitation. "I didn't want to text again," he said. His voice sounded tired, but steady. Felt like something I should say out loud. "I'm glad you called." There was a pause on the line. Distance measured, not in miles, but in everything that had finally been spoken. "I've been thinking about who you were," he said, "and who you are, and how unfair it is that you felt you had to choose between them." She closed her eyes. "I didn't think you'd understand." "I didn't understand," he admitted. "Not then, maybe not even now. But I know this. I don't want you shrinking yourself just so I feel comfortable." The words loosened. Something she hadn't realized she was holding. "Don't know what this means for us yet," he continued, "but I want to find out. If you do." "Yes," she said quietly, "I do." They didn't solve anything in that conversation. They didn't need to. It was enough to leave the door open. After the call ended, Catherine sat at the table and let the coffee cool. For the first time since leaving the base, she didn't replay the shots, didn't calculate, didn't review. The past was still there. It always would be, but it no longer demanded center stage. Later, she stepped outside and walked the length of the street. Neighbors waved. Someone nodded hello. She returned the gestures easily, no longer feeling like she was passing through someone else's life. When she reached the end of the block, she stopped, turned, and looked back toward her house, toward the life she had built, cracked but standing. She didn't know exactly what came next. That uncertainty no longer frightened her. Some people were forged in fire and spent the rest of their lives trying to cool the metal. Others learned how to carry the heat without letting it burn everything they touched. Catherine Hayes turned back toward home and walked on, no longer running, no longer hiding, finally moving forward with all of herself intact. The days that followed settled into something unfamiliar but steady. Not peace, she didn't trust that word, but balance. Catherine moved through her routines with a new awareness, no longer bracing against herself. The past wasn't gone. It didn't need to be. It sat where it belonged now, no longer steering every thought. David came home a week later, not with answers, not with certainty, just with honesty. They talked late into the night, sometimes calmly, sometimes painfully. Some truths landed hard, others softened with time. Neither of them pretended it was easy. They didn't need to. The base would be rebuilt, reports finalized, names filed away. Somewhere, analysts would dissect the attack, debate motives, draw lines on maps. Catherine was already becoming a footnote, useful, classified, quietly sealed. She was fine with that. One evening, she returned the rifle to the locked case. Not in denial, not in shame, just in choice. It stayed there not because she was afraid of who she was, but because she no longer needed proof of it. She understood now that identity wasn't erased by walking away. And it wasn't defined by violence either. It was shaped by what you chose to carry forward. The world didn't change because she accepted herself. It didn't need to, but her place in it did. Somewhere far north, a ridge still overlooked a valley. Snow still fell, wind still shifted, and 7 men were still gone. Here, in a quiet life rebuilt with truth instead of silence, Catherine Hayes moved forward not as a weapon, not as a secret, but as a whole person who had finally stopped dividing herself to survive. The road ahead wasn't empty anymore, and for the first time in years, she wasn't walking it alone. The story didn't end with clarity or closure. It ended with continuity. Life resumed in small, ordinary motions. Grocery lists, morning coffee, conversations that drifted and circled before landing somewhere honest. Catherine learned that healing wasn't a single decision, it was repetition. Choosing, again and again, not to disappear inside herself. There were moments when the old instincts stirred. A loud noise, a sudden silence. Her body still reacted before her mind did. She didn't fight it anymore. She acknowledged it, let it pass. Experience didn't vanish just because it was inconvenient. David watched this quietly. He didn't try to fix her. He didn't ask her to explain everything all at once. He learned when to ask questions and when to sit beside her in silence. That mattered more than answers. Sometimes they talked about Granite, about the soldiers, about the ones who didn't make it. Sometimes they didn't. Both were allowed. She never returned to the base. She wasn't asked to. Her role there had been specific and final. But occasionally, she found herself scanning the weather, noticing shifts in wind, patterns in clouds. Old habits didn't die. They just changed meaning. One evening, weeks later, she stood outside as the sun set, painting the sky in muted colors. David joined her, hands in his pockets. "You ever miss it?" he asked, not accusing, just curious. She considered the question carefully. "I miss the clarity," she said, "not the killing, the knowing exactly what mattered in the moment." He nodded. "And now it's harder," she admitted. "But it's real." That seemed to satisfy him. Catherine Hayes would never be simple. She would never be untouched. But she was no longer fractured. The parts of her that once felt incompatible now existed in the same space, no longer at war. Some people spent their lives trying to outrun who they were. Others stopped running and learned how to stand still. Catherine had done enough moving, enough hiding, enough pretending. The past remained, not as a threat, but as a foundation, solid, unmoving, acknowledged. And from it, she built something quieter, something true. The world kept turning. Snow fell where it always had. Somewhere, ridges still waited in silence. But here, in this life, Catherine Hayes was present fully, honestly, and finally, at rest with herself. Asterisk, asterisk. Time moved the way it always did forward. Indifferent, steady. Weeks became months. The intensity of Granite faded from headlines that never mentioned it. From reports locked behind classifications. From conversations that slowly stopped circling back to that day. What remained wasn't noise or drama. It was residue. Catherine felt it in quiet moments. In the way she still woke early. In how her eyes tracked movement without permission. In the calm that settled over her when problems became complicated. None of it scared her anymore. It simply was. She learned that acceptance didn't arrive all at once. It came in small, unremarkable choices. Leaving the house without checking exits. Sitting with her back to a window because she wanted to, not because she needed to. Letting David see the parts of her that had once stayed locked away. They argued sometimes. About trust. About silence. About the years she'd kept sealed off. But they argued honestly, without evasion. That mattered. Truth, once introduced, demanded maintenance. One afternoon, she packed away the old notebooks, the range cards, the maps, the margins filled with calculations only she could read. She didn't destroy them. She didn't memorialize them either. She placed them in a box, labeled it plainly, and slid it onto a shelf. History didn't need ceremony. Occasionally, she thought of the woman who had driven up a mountain road with a wool scarf and no uniform, convinced she was visiting a husband and nothing more. That version of herself felt distant now, but not naive. She had been honest then. Too just incomplete. People changed, sometimes violently, sometimes quietly. The world hadn't asked Catherine Hayes to return to what she was. It hadn't asked her to forget it either. That choice, she realized, had always been hers. On a clear evening, she stood outside with David as the last light slipped below the horizon. No tension, no questions waiting to be answered, just presence. "Do you ever wish it hadn't happened?" he asked. She thought for a long moment. Then, "No. I wish it hadn't cost what it did, but I don't wish it away." He nodded, understanding enough. Somewhere far off, snow would fall again, wind would shift, ridges would wait. The world would continue to produce moments that demanded more than people thought they had to give. Catherine knew now that she could meet those moments without losing herself to them. She had been a weapon once, a secret, a shadow. Now she was something quieter, something harder to define. And that was enough. The world kept turning, and for the first time in a very long while, Catherine Hayes turned with it whole, unhidden, and still standing. Asterisk, asterisk, there was no final moment. No clean line where the story stopped. Life didn't offer that kind of symmetry. Instead, it continued the way it always had, through repetition, through small choices made without ceremony. Catherine learned to recognize the difference between vigilance and fear, between memory and control. Some days she carried the past lightly. Other days, it weighed more. Neither meant failure. David returned fully to his work. She returned fully to her life. Separate, overlapping, no longer. They didn't pretend the distance created by truth had vanished, but they also didn't let it widen. They learned each other again, slowly, with fewer assumptions and more patience. Occasionally, someone would ask her about granite. She kept the answers brief, factual, enough to satisfy curiosity, without reopening doors that didn't need to be walked through again. The people who truly needed to know already did. The rifle stayed locked away, not as a rejection, as a boundary. She understood now that strength wasn't proven by readiness alone. Sometimes it was proven by restraint. On a quiet morning, months later, she stood outside as fresh snow began to fall, light, unthreatening, almost gentle. She let it land on her coat, on her hair, unmoved by the cold. Snow no longer meant danger by default. It was just weather again. She thought, briefly, of the ridge, of angles and distances and decisions made in seconds that altered dozens of lives. The thought came without pain, without pride. It passed. Some people lived in chapters, others lived in layers. Catherine Hayes had learned to live in both. She had been many things: a soldier, a sniper, a wife, a protector, a secret. None of them cancelled the others. Together, they formed something durable, something honest. The world did not pause to acknowledge that change. It didn't need to. She turned back toward the house, toward the life she was actively choosing, step by step, with open eyes and no disguises left to wear. The snow continued to fall, and Catherine Hayes walked forward, not into silence, not into shadow, but into whatever came next, carrying all of herself with her, and nothing left hidden behind. The years didn't soften the memory, they clarified it. Granite became a reference point, not a wound. A moment where everything she had tried to divide inside herself collapsed into one truth. She was capable, and she was human. Those two things could exist together. They always had. Life unfolded without drama. That, she learned, was its own kind of victory. She and David never returned to the way things were before. They became something else, less protected, more deliberate. There were still silences between them, but they were chosen now, not enforced. Space used for thinking, not hiding. Sometimes, late at night, she would wake before dawn and sit quietly, listening to the house settle. No scanning, no rehearsing, just awareness. If old instincts stirred, she acknowledged them the way one acknowledges weather present. Influential, not in control. She never never trained again. She wasn't called back, and she didn't offer. That chapter remained closed, not locked, simply finished. Skills didn't vanish, but purpose had shifted. She no longer needed to stand on ridgelines to know who she was. On anniversaries, she didn't mark. Somewhere snow fell again. Wind crossed high ground. Men with weapons practiced patterns, learned from others before them. The world repeated itself, endlessly. Catherine Hayes didn't. She changed in smaller ways now, subtler ones, learning how to be still without guilt, learning how to let others carry weight she'd always assumed was hers alone, learning that control was not the same thing as responsibility. Once, a neighbor asked what she used to do before moving there. Catherine smiled and gave a simple answer. It was true, even if it wasn't complete. I worked in security, she said. That was enough. The rest belonged to her. There was no final reckoning, no redemption arc, no return to innocence, just continuity, cleaner than before, stronger for having been tested. Catherine Hayes had stopped trying to outrun herself. She lived now with both feet on the ground, eyes open, past acknowledged and present chosen. The world continued, indifferent and vast, and within it, she remained steady, unhidden, and no longer divided.